Hi everyone, I'm Anthony. Like many others, I like to play PUBG. My friends and I organized whole competitions. The winner got everything. We bet on anything. Money, watches, headphones, and so on. The point was not even in the prizes, but in the victory itself. It's cool to be recognized as a winner. The most interesting thing is that I always won the match, whether I played alone or in a team. In the latter case, the team won thanks to me. Maybe I'm just lucky, or maybe I'm just a good player. That's what I thought, until I met a guy named Shoot. I didn't know then that it would change my whole life. Do you want to know how? Then put class, subscribe to our channel and watch further, and write your opinion in the comments. So first, I'll tell you a little about myself. Like I said, my name is Anthony, or just Tony. I'm 17 years old, and I'm in high school in Seattle. I am an only child in my family. I have both parents. They work from morning to night. I have a simpler schedule. In the morning to school. There before lunch, after classes, we usually gather in the backyard of my house or at any of my friends and play PUBG until the evening. We discovered this game a long time ago, but at first it was not that interesting. And only then the guys and I get involved properly. I honed my skill every day, became the best among my friends. We just loved playing games together. That was the excitement, especially when we were playing for a prize. My mother always called my game Shooter. She scolded me for sitting too much with my face buried in the phone. Sometimes she even took it from me. My dad called me a spoiled egoist, and then that I said that I should have given me a little brother or sister. Then maybe I would have grown up different. After such words, my parents ran out of arguments, and this was my last word. To tell you a secret, I thought I wasn't really a great player. I just had my own mini good luck charm. I called it the amulet, and it always hung around my neck. I wore it every day and didn't even take it off at night. The amulet was in the form of a triangle of green color. It is more like a stone. I don't know the exact name of it, but I had half of it. My mother told me that my grandparents had put it on since I was born. I asked where half of it was, but my mother said that it was probably lost. The amulet was special to me because my grandmother made it with her own hands. She and her grandfather used to work in a jewelry store and sometimes made things with their own hands. By the way, they were supposed to come to our house this summer. I was happy about it because my grandparents loved me very much. They always brought me loads of toys. And the day after they arrived, Grandma made her famous casserole. The day before they arrived, I even came early after school. Did not play with the guys to help my mother prepare the house. So earlier, Saturday morning started with a warm hug. My parents and I met them and quickly brought them into the house. We talked a lot that day, ate a lot, and sorted out gifts. A couple of days later, the weekdays started, and I went back to school. It turns out that my mother took time off from work to spend time with the old people. So when I came home from school, the house always smelled like baking. However, on one of those days, when I came and went into the living room, neither my mother nor my grandparents were anywhere. I thought they were out shopping when I heard the sound of crying coming from my parents' bedroom. As I crept upstairs, I heard a conversation. I think my grandmother told my mother that I had a right to know the truth, but I didn't know what it was. "What's the difference if she is still dead?" my mother said. But my grandfather also did not let up. He said that it is not certain and that I can meet her in life, and I should know everything about her. Only then, after a couple of minutes, I finally realized that it was about my little sister. I couldn't stand it. Opened the door wide and asked directly about which sister we were talking about. They were all scared. Asked how things were at school, trying to change the subject, but I didn't let them. I asked again about which little sister I was talking about, and my mother immediately burst into tears. Turns out I have a little sister. We were born a year apart, so I don't remember my mom with a tummy. Her name was Alice, as my mother told me. When I was 2 years old and Alice was 1 year old, my grandmother gave us this amulet, one for her and one for me, so that we would never lose each other. Oddly enough, this is exactly what happened. We went to the park as a family. Alice ran off to look at the monkey and then disappeared from sight. The search took 4 years. Why, I hardly remember such moments. The father and mother were hysterical, but the daughter was nowhere to be found. All that's left of her are photos I've never seen. Parents searched for her every day, involving not only the police, but also volunteers, acquaintances, and friends, but everything was unsuccessful. Then a difficult decision was made to leave the city a few years later. So we moved here to Seattle, where we started a new life. I stood in the middle of the room and listened to the story with surprise. It seemed to me that this was a fairy tale or another trick of my parents to teach me something, but it was not so. I couldn't get over the shock for a long time and almost didn't say a word during the evening. Then I went back to my room and went to PUBG with the guys, where I told them my secret during the game, so it was easier for me. My friends were as shocked as I was, but they tried to support me and invited me to play a match with strangers. I agreed. At first, I played the slot machine. Then I realized that I was losing for the 3rd time in a row. I thought I was just in a bad mood because I was in shock. The number of losses increased to 6 times, and I was killed and killed. Already my friends were worried because it wasn't like me, so I began to gradually come to my senses and saw that I was being brazenly killed by some dude under the nickname Shoot. I finally got ready, tuned in, and started playing with him again and again. But I lost. It was clearly not my day. I said that tomorrow I would take revenge and went to bed. The next day, as promised, I entered the game right after the last session. The guys and I decided to sit in the park on the grass. I felt ready to fight, and thanks to the game, I almost didn't remember yesterday, but I was going to lose again. You know, that day, I was even more infuriated by the jester. I have already talked to him about my personal enemy, because before he appeared, I was the best player. So we competed every day for a couple of weeks, and I never managed to win. Oh, how angry I was with him. My guys even started laughing at me. I decided to go on the offensive, but only with a slightly different method. Familiarity. I texted this dude and we started chatting. To be honest, it seemed to me that this is a cool person and a worthy player. Special interest appeared when I found out that it was a girl. I decided not to tell my friends about this fact until I met her myself. Her name was Ashley, and she was a little younger than me. We exchanged numbers and began to chat. We had a lot in common. It turned out that she, too, had recently moved to live here with her parents. When I heard about this, I immediately invited her to meet me. I wanted to learn from her new tricks in the game and how she always managed to beat me. We met in the park. She was cute to look at, and I even thought we had more in common than we thought. 3 hours passed unnoticed. I was blown away when the clock looked up and we hurried home. I followed her almost to her door, but suddenly a bottle flew from the window. I heard shouting and swearing. Immediately I realized that it was her parents, so scandalous. She was embarrassed for me and tried to get me out, but I didn't want to leave her like this. At this moment, her drunk father came out, grabbed her by the t-shirt and started dragging her home, shouting loudly at me. I couldn't stand it. I attacked him and we got into a fight. Then his wife flew out. She was also drunk and started yelling that she would call the police. Ashley was in tears and her father and I were still fighting. Eventually the police arrived and we were all taken to the station for noise and complaints from neighbors. After a thorough showdown with her parents, my parents arrived. While Ashley and I sat in the cell, I tried to adjust my t-shirt. Ash noticed my amulet around my neck, and I pulled it out to show her, and she froze in place. I asked her twice what was wrong, and she said, "Where did you get it?" I said as is, my grandparents gave it to me. At that moment, she pulled out the exact same amulet, also half of the other side. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say or how to react. My parents came running into the station. When my mother saw what turned out to be Alice instead of Ashley, she recognized her immediately, without any amulets. My mother was hysterical. She ran into the camera and began to hug and kiss Alice. She cried for a long time and abruptly said something, and my father stood next to her in shock, also wiped tears from his eyes and was silent. We all couldn't believe that my little sister was found. As I told her, on the day when she got lost, she was sheltered by a woman who worked as a nurse in an orphanage. The nurse raised her alone. She had no one, no husband, no children, so she considered it a gift from above and kept the child for herself, but soon died of illness. At work, when they found out that she had a child at home, they took the girl to an orphanage, and after a few years, these people adopted her. They used to be normal, but then they started drinking more and more often, Alice said. In short, now my mother is not a step behind her, so our family was reunited. Alice's custody papers are being processed, and in the meantime, she is teaching me how to play PUBG.
I'm Charlotte. Just a month ago, I managed to get out of my boyfriend's trap. Ex-boyfriend, actually. I'm still reeling from the horror I've been through. And the first thing I found out is that my boyfriend is actually a maniac. I'll tell you about it because I can't keep silent any longer. In the meantime, subscribe and watch other animations. After all, we still have a lot of interesting stories. Anyway, it was winter when we met Benjamin. We ran into him at the ice rink. Everything seemed so romantic. Benj kept me warm with his jacket that night, buying hot coffee while we went for a ride. And in the late afternoon, we went to a dinner and ate burgers, and after that, he didn't walk me home. It was wonderful. I laughed a lot with him, and Benjamin could make jokes. Then he showed up the next day, invited me for a walk, and the next day we went to a movie, to a cafe. Each time he came up with a new occupation. We saw each other every day, and when it didn't work out, he wrote or called. Imperceptibly, feelings grew. I introduced him to my friends, mother, and sister. Even though it hadn't been long since we'd started dating, I felt like I loved him. He made a positive impression on everyone, and I was proud of it. Benj himself was a little older than me. He was the only man in the family, so he earned as much as he could to support the family, his mother and brother. I was struck by his strength of spirit, the optimism that he exuded. Several times he left for work in another city, but never forgot to bring back some souvenir. However, he never told me exactly what he did, and I didn't know where he lived. These things didn't bother me at all, because the main thing was his attitude and love. About 3 months later, Benjamin invited me to spend the weekend with him. He rented a small cottage in the mountains. It was already spring, and the view from there promised to be amazing. I told my mother I was going to Tiffany's to study for my school exam, and I went with him. My girlfriend promised to cover for me. That's why I loved her the most. She told me not to worry about anything and to rest. What could sound better? I quickly packed my bag and ran out of the house. My boyfriend was already waiting for me on the street. We jumped in the car and drove off. Despite the fact that it was raining and it was cool, the mood was good. Spring, after all. A couple of hours later, we arrived at this cottage. It was beautiful, small, incredibly cozy. There were only 4 rooms, and the living room with the fireplace was the largest. It was warm inside, and there were groceries in the kitchen. It turns out that Benjamin had already made supplies for us. I offered to make pasta, but he said that he would do everything himself. Poured me wine, sat me in a chair, covered me with a blanket, and went to cook, while I watched my favorite TV series on my laptop and waited for dinner. From the kitchen floated a delicious smell of something meat. After a couple of hours, Benj called for food, and he cooked chicken in the oven and a salad. After a big dinner, we went out on the porch, but he stood behind me and hugged me, talking about his feelings. I don't think I've ever been happier. It was beautiful. Suddenly his phone rang, and he went into the house. And I wanted to enjoy the cool air, and I stayed. A second later, I heard the sound of a voice. Or I thought I heard it. I started to listen, but it was hard to do because of the rain. The strange thing was that there was nothing else nearby except our house. Voices from the basement? Then someone touched my shoulder sharply from behind, and I screamed and shuddered. It was Benj. "What are you doing? Is everything okay? Can you have enough wine already?" he said, laughing. Then he apologized and said he needed to leave for a couple of hours. His friend had a flat tire in his car, and he was stuck not far from here, and he needed help. I nodded my head and said that everything was fine. I would wait for him here. Benji started the car and drove away. I went inside and poured myself more wine. The empty house didn't look so nice to me now. As soon as I sat back in my chair, the same voices rang out in my head. I tried to distract myself by turning up the volume on the show, but I kept thinking about that voice. Am I being paranoid? Turning off the computer, I lay down on the floor and tapped my fist several times. And I was answered. Oh my God! I knocked again and heard, "Save!" I was terrified. I got up abruptly from the floor and didn't know what to do. Then I heard the blows and pleas for help even more clearly. I was so scared that I wanted to run. I ran out into the street, reached the gate, and stopped. Something made me come back. I knew the sounds were coming from underground. I ran into the backyard and found a door leading to the basement, which was covered with boards. I could barely dig it out, and there was an iron lock on the door. I managed to break it with a crowbar. Then I saw steps leading down. It was damp, dark, and smelly. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and started walking slowly down the stairs. Inside, there were some unnecessary things and nothing else. Then I heard again, "Save!" It turns out there was another room. I opened the door and saw that inside the dim light is sitting some girl. Looking at me, she began to ask for help in a loud voice. My legs gave way from fear and my heart seemed to run into my heels. Somehow intuitively, I ran to her and untied her hands. The girl was unhurt, but very exhausted. She looked at me in the face and told me I had to run away. We held hands, but the door closed abruptly. She screamed, and I realized that Benjamin was back. I asked him to open the door, promising that everything would be kept secret, no one would find out what happened here. I swore. And he just said, "You're right, no one will know what happened here." And the footsteps began to move away. Emily, that's her name, got hysterical and started crying and said that he was going to come with a camera and start hitting us and taking pictures. This was his fetish, and it was the least of the evils that he did with other girls. "He's a real maniac!" screamed Emily. But I wasn't ready to give up, and I wasn't ready to panic. He left out one detail: my phone number. I immediately called the police and gave them my approximate location. Help should be here any minute. Suddenly, we heard the door begin to open slowly. I pressed myself as close to the wall as I could. Benj came down the steps, and I hit him in the back of the head with my phone. He fell, but got up quickly and hit me in the face. Then he started saying that no one would be able to get out of his trap and attacked me again. Amelia jumped on his back, but he deftly turned her over on the ground. I could already hear the dogs barking in the street. The police had arrived. We screamed as hard as we could. Employees quickly broke down the door to the basement. Benjamin did not even have time to think as he was handcuffed. Emily was very scared, and I was also in shock. It turns out that his name was not Benji, and he has recently been wanted in a neighboring town. His weakness is schoolgirls. In general, he is a pedophile with abnormal sadistic tendencies. Now he faces jail, while I don't go to the rink anymore.